Hey guys, welcome back to BoreDraw. This
Episode 8, baby.
Episode 8, yeah. And today we have a massive guest. We got a big guest.
Yeah, we
today.
weren't lying when we said we had an exciting special guest last episode.
It's a great 45 minutes talking about football. We got Dan, otherwise known as HLTCO, on, and we're gonna be talking all things Palace. We're gonna talk about all how he got into football, everything. So sit back, relax, enjoy. Hey guys, so we are joined by our man Dan, otherwise known as HLTCO, on Twitter, on Patreon, across the board. Big Palace fan here.
We're very excited to have him on the podcast. Dan, how are you doing today, mate?
I'm good, thanks. Yourselves?
Yeah, not too bad. How are you dealing with the hot weather at the moment?
Oh, it's an absolute nightmare, to be honest.
It's hard to function.
I've got an office that's like a loft conversion. In my
okay.
house.
That's not ideal, is
Obviously, heat rises.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
I'm on a main road, so even if you open the sort of skylight in the ceiling, there's often traffic that goes past, so it disrupts the microphone. So whenever I'm recording, it's a bit like I'm in a sauna. In a sweatbox. Yeah, it's not ideal.
Lovely.
But I mean, it's suffer for the cause, you know what I mean?
It is.
Exactly.
I saw you have a back and forth with a guy on Twitter saying that 40 degrees in Greece is the same in England. And I was just thinking, what is he on about?
Well, you know, I mean, that guy, I don't even know who he is. I know that his name's
him.
Jeffrey Peel now, but other than that, the thing is, I genuinely sometimes question why I even get involved in conversations.
I'm the same, though. Some things I see
outside of football, because obviously people will go, oh, just stick to football. And you're like, well, okay, but I'm a human being. And
100%.
You're not allowed to have an opinion.
So in that particular instance, I just thought, well, you're talking rubbish, and I'm going to tell you you're talking rubbish. And then it's a strange thing, because if you've only got 40 followers and you say the exact same thing, but it gets one like and one comment, they won't bother. But as soon as you've got a certain number of followers and you get a certain number of likes or retweets, it's almost as if people feel obligated to respond. So you end up in a situation where, I don't know, you almost rather be able to go, you're talking shit, can you just leave it and we'll move on from there? But instead, they almost want to fight their corner. So you sort of have to guard against it, or at least go in sort of two-footed, which is what I did.
Yeah, no, I liked it.
We love a two-footed challenge, even it is on Twitter.
Bring it back.
So a bit about you, Dan. Obviously, you've got a very decent Twitter following, and you've got a Patreon where people can listen to your podcast talking about Palace and general football. Do you just want to talk about how you got into that?
Yeah, I mean, I can sort of give you a bit of a quick history of it. I mean, I'm 33 years old, pretty much from the age of about, I'd say, 7 or 8. I wanted to get into writing about football. The whole thing was very romantic and intoxicating to me. I can't tell you why exactly, but it just always was. I geared my whole education around it, really, my A-levels and everything else. Went on to do a degree in sport journalism, but I mean, I came out of uni in 2010, and by the time I'd done my 3 years, I was a little bit, I don't know what you'd call it really, not disillusioned, but a bit frustrated with the sport journalism industry, because there's
like the entrance routes and stuff.
Well, yeah, because you've got quite a lot of nepotism that goes on.
100%.
Or backpatting, if you see what I mean. Like,
it
didn't matter how passionate you were about football or how good a writer you were. I went on numerous work experience placements, and there were people there that were a nephew or a cousin of someone that was a sub-editor. And obviously that's the way of the world. But part of me was thinking, well, hang on, you know, if you're not being judged on your work rate and your ability to write, you're already starting 10 yards behind in a 100-metre race. Do you see what I'm saying?
100%.
So, I mean, I could have gone down a route of coming out of uni and doing match reports on non-league football in South London and try to sort of claw my way up in that sense. But a large part of the reason that I'm so in love with football is because I go to Palace every week, or at least every home game and as many away games as I can do. And I didn't want to stop going to Palace. So I sort of, more out of a passion and a hobby than anything else, in 2011, I just started writing about Palace. Different opinions I had, different thoughts. That then morphed into more of a news-based blog. I put adverts on there, I think in about 2000 13, maybe 14. But with Google AdSense, I don't know if you're familiar with that whole model.
Yeah.
You got about £1 or £2 for every 1,000 views. And obviously, it's nice to have some sort of income from it, but it was never going to support me for a living.
Yeah.
And I was always conscious of, the clickbait that goes on, because as much as people on social media rally against it, the Sun, the Daily Mail, Talk Sport, Sky Sports News, and that easy way of getting content and eyeballs on your website.
Oh yeah, we had a chat about TalkSport last week and how they do exactly that.
Well, yeah, but the reason that they do it is because it's very, very easy to get people driven to your website. And ultimately, in that model, content is king. So if you can mislead someone with a headline that doesn't necessarily speak to the truth of the actual article, it doesn't matter once they're in the door, because they count as an interaction. And that in itself is obviously a bit of a dodgy ground to be on, because you end up getting people that are resentful of the content you produce, but you sort of need to do that to pay the bills. So the whole idea behind the Patreon was that you'd have a situation where people can fund you themselves. There are no adverts on it. There's no clickbait. It's just me talking into a microphone and bringing you up to date with either what's going on with Palace or general football. But to be honest, I only did interviews to start with. Initially, my first ever interview was with Darren Ambrose. Moved on from there and have interviewed different Palace people over the last 3 or 4 years. But then I sort of decided that I was going to do a daily Palace podcast, because I knew that, as great as it was talking to Palace personalities every few weeks, there wasn't an infinite supply of them.
Yeah.
And then in September of 2020, I got above 1,000 patrons, which enabled me to quit my normal job. And then because it basically happened over a 36-hour period, my numbers went from 700 to 1,000. Because I was walking to work one day, I ticked over to 700 patrons, tweeted it out and said, I'm now only 300 away from being able to do this for a living. And incredibly, it just caught fire in the way that certain things on the internet do. Yeah. And over the course of the next 24 hours, it went above 1,000. A lot of those people weren't Palace fans. And I knew that with the best will in the world, it wasn't as if a Spurs fan was going to stick around for more than a month or two listening to a daily Palace podcast, because with all due respect, they're not going to be that interested in it. So then I started doing the general football podcast alongside it to sort of retain those listeners. And thankfully, what are we now, almost 2 years on, I'm still managing to carve out a living doing it. So yeah, that's pretty much the story of it in as quick as way as I can tell it.
That's super exciting that you've turned your passion from a passion into what you now say is your full-time job, and that's super exciting.
I think that's a dream for every football fan, isn't it?
But like you said, the industry, to get into it is super hard, so carving out your own niche is kind of the ideal way. In terms of your love for Palace, I was listening to your podcasts, I think it was a few weeks ago, your love letter to football. And you spoke about how your kind of love for football was formed a lot more organically than some kind of kids are these days. I joke a lot about Project Mbappe with my girlfriend, with the boys, and how when I have a son or a daughter, I'm going to Project Mbappe them super hard, make them a football fan from day one. But I was listening to you speak about how that's very different to how your love of football kind of originated. Could you kind of talk a bit about how your love for football started?
Yeah, I think it's probably important to highlight that my dad is as big a football fan as me. It's not as though he's some sort of hands-off, only watches match of the day for 20 minutes. I will talk to my dad probably upwards of half hour every single day about football, not just about Palace, but about what's going on. But as I said in the podcast, obviously, bit of a plug if anyone hasn't listened to it, it's free and available to listen to on Twitter. It sort of, and I sort of credit him really with the way that he went about it, because he didn't ram it down my throat. It wasn't a case of, I'm a football fan, so you have to be a football
Yeah.
fan. But he was always sort of there to guide me through it, if you see what I'm saying. So, like, I remember there was a game on when I was 5 or 6. Chelsea were playing on the TV, and back then, what was that? 94. There was not as anywhere near as much football on the TV as there is now. So the fact that Chelsea were on the TV in itself was a novelty. And he was sitting in the back room of my house, my mum and dad's house, this is, watching it. And obviously, when you're a little kid, you sort of take cues off your parents a lot more than when you're 20, when you don't really care what they're up to. And I could see how engrossed he was in it. And that in itself made me curious as to exactly why he was so intently watching the TV, because he'd have the news on, or he'd have the weather or EastEnders or whatever was on the TV, and he'd sort of be paying passing attention to it. But he was watching this game of football as if his life depended on it. And obviously your dad is your hero for most people when they're a little boy or girl. And I just wanted to know what it was that he was watching and why he was so engrossed. And little things like that. There was the FA Cup final of 1996. Manchester United were playing Liverpool. It was a game that, you remember, I don't know if you ever have heard the story about the Liverpool players with the white suits when they went on the pitch before the game kicked off at Wembley, and they were wearing these cream or white suits. And it was almost as if they thought they had the cup final won before a ball had been kicked. It ended up with a situation where the game wasn't particularly great, but Eric Cantona scored the winner. I think it was either towards the end of 90 or in extra time. And they won 1-0, Man United. But I was 7 at that point, and we were at a wedding. And I was just getting into football and sort of understanding what it meant in society generally, particularly to men at that point. Obviously, that sounds sexist, but I think as time has moved on, it's become a more inclusive game. And I remember getting back from the service itself, and this was as a 7-year-old kid, and there were blokes crowding around the TV just watching football. No one was really talking. And obviously, throughout the wedding, everyone's chatting, everyone's sort of congratulating the bride and groom and the parents of the people that were getting married, and it was all very nice. And we went back to this pub or this venue, wherever it was that this wedding took place, and there were 20 or 30 blokes just crowded around his telly.
Yeah, eyes glued to the screen, And
once again, you know, as a 7-year-old kid, particularly as a little boy, I sort of wanted in to what that was.
Involved, that's it.
And that sort of stuff was what made me ultra curious, really, as to exactly why this got so many people so engrossed. And obviously the summer of 96 was Euro 96, which was in this country. Again, another little story, and I'm sort of going through my own head here, just off the top of my brain. We were at Legoland, and the first game of the Euros, England were playing Switzerland, and we were there with some family friends, and my dad and the guy that we were with, who was the parent of the other 2 children we were with, had recorded it on a VHS. So they were trying to avoid the score all the way through. We were in a queue to go on a ride at Legoland, and this bloke had a radio. Alan Shearer scored after 2 minutes, I think it was, and just went mad in the queue. And then every bloke around him was just asking him what had happened, and he was telling them.
Oh, wow,
and once again, you know, you're a 7-year-old kid, and you think this is something. This is not just normal life. And I think that has been a thread that has continued throughout, really, and it's just grown.
Yeah, I really think the way that a lot of people get into football is an accumulation of events like that. It's the special moments that you do remember, like the wedding, like Legoland, which have built you into the person that loves football today. And everyone has their own unique backstories to why they love football and their own special moments. So it's just brilliant.
I mean, I would say as well, school is a huge part of it for me. Because it's another thing where, and I don't want to say you have to like football to be, you know, popular or have friends, but it undoubtedly helps, because it will set you apart from certain mates, and it will group you in with others that support the same team you do, and it all becomes like a big soap opera with ever moving parts, if you see what I mean. So you're allowed into something that, you know, it will be the same now. Obviously, I'm well out of school, but like, you go in on a Monday morning, and the first thing people used to talk about was what happened on Saturday and Sunday. And it gives you that routine and that structure. And I think it's something that I often say. I feel sorry for the people that aren't involved in it to a proper level, because I feel like they're missing out on a core part of what having, that tribal nature to you is. It is a pleasant thing to do most of the time.
And it provides you a fallback. You could enter an unknown space with unknown people, and you can always think 9 out of 10 times I could pluck up a conversation about football and that'd bed me in, and I'd just lose those nerves about, how do I approach these people? What do we talk about? That's always a good kind of fallback on.
I think in recent years as well, especially with England's success, you're seeing a lot of people moving towards the football sphere as is, just because they want to be involved. And then through that, they're actually getting involved in the game. Like, we've had a mate who's got really into a fantasy Premier League just through hanging around with us lot during the Euros and the World Cup and everything. So it is, do you know what I mean? It's an ever-growing space, and the success of England men and women's team is only bolstering that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Premier League is ubiquitous in itself. I mean, it's there to be watched or sort of soaked up. And as much as I might moan about Twitter at times, it does give people that freedom to dip their toe in or go completely in and be immersed in it. And obviously that has some negative impacts, because you get people on football Twitter that can go too far the other way. But I mean, in general, I think it's just something that I just love football. I know that sounds like a very easy thing and an obvious thing to say, but for me, if I've been obsessed with something from the age of 7 until 33, then there's probably a good reason for it.
Yeah, there's no other word to describe it really apart from obsession.
I'm a fanatic for football.
Yeah.
And obviously Palace are the primary reason for it, but it spawns different interests. I sort of pride myself on being able to strike a conversation with anyone, whether they're a Swindon fan, whether they're a Luton fan, a Man United fan, and I can sort of tell within 2 or 3 minutes of talking to someone that says they like football, whether or not they just watch Match of the Day and look at the back page of the Sun, or whether they do actually involve themselves in the sport. And I think going is certainly something that differentiates your sort of casual football fan from one that will embed themselves in it completely.
Yeah, 100%. Well, you've got a Arsenal fan in myself and a QPR fan in Luke. So we're a bit all over the place, but we can talk about that another time. One thing I wanted to talk about, following when you brought up the 96 Euros and you were at Legoland, the 97 playoffs, obviously you're known as on Twitter is Hopkin looking to curl one. And that's from Palace playing Sheffield United in 97 playoffs. Do you remember? So you must have been about 8, 9 at that point. Yeah. Do you remember what you were doing on that?
Well, I wasn't actually there. So here's the mad thing about it. It's weird because obviously the goal itself is now synonymous with the Twitter page, the podcast and everything else. But what I wanted when creating the name for the Twitter page was something that had an emotional attachment for Palace fans.
Yeah.
And regardless of whether they just got into supporting the club, whether they've been going 50 years, it was a playoff final goal in the 90th minute. The game was 0-0 at the time. Terrible game of football, by the way. And he's put it top corner and we got promoted to the Premier League. And obviously the commentary itself, David Hopkin, little tiny gap, and then looking at Cole one as it hits the back of the net. It's iconic.
Yeah.
And that in itself was really the main reason why I chose that goal. Not because, it was the moment for me that crystallised my love of the football club. It just went very well with what I wanted to sort of symbolise with the Twitter page.
Yeah,
someone
like
has
top
actually
3 or top 1 Palace moment.
Yeah,
for
someone has actually
than yourself
said in recent times, had the blog been, or the podcast as it is now, had been founded in say 2015, it'd probably be called Zaha. Oh yes, but I mean that is part and parcel of the ever-changing sort of patterns of football, I guess.
I mean, QPR had one pretty similar with Zamora in the last minute.
Yeah, exactly.
I tried to call the podcast Zamora, but Roz wouldn't have it.
Well, you've got a different set of fan bases. That
we have to give.
Yeah.
I think we'll move on to Crystal Palace and talking about their pre-season last season and their expectations for this season. Obviously, last season you had Vieira come in very early, and I think he was favourite to be sacked before Christmas. And what a season you had, really, with the squad you had, such a youthful squad with such exciting players.
Which was new for Palace as well, because under Roy, it was kind of a lot of...
it was known entities, wasn't it?
Yeah. It was Prem-proven, kind of late in their career.
So,
but Vieira kind of freshened up the squad. And at that point, Vieira had just come off of kind of like an up and down time previous to Palace. And so what was your kind of first thoughts when, not Vieira linked with the job, but when he got the job, what were you thinking?
Well, I mean, I don't know how well you remember that period of time because it's just over a year ago now. But prior to Vieira coming in, we were very heavily linked with Lucien Favre.
Yeah.
And that was at the final stages of being done. Like, it had got to the stage where he'd said yes and we'd started the visa process. And then he got cold feet and pulled out. And I'm not going to lie, myself, pretty much every other Palace fan were devastated by that because he's a manager with huge pedigree who we really thought was a great coup for the club. And then to have that fall apart at the final moment was pretty grim. And then the Patrick Vieira stuff, there was no real rumour about it before it actually happened. It got broken by David Ornstein that he was going to be appointed. And there was no suggestion of it beforehand. It was just, right, well, Palace aren't getting Lucien Favre. It's all systems go with Patrick Vieira, and on we go. And I'm not going to blow my own trumpet here, but you can imagine there were a fair few Palace fans that were genuinely concerned about exactly what was going to happen, because at that point we had the oldest squad, or one of the oldest squads in the league. There were a huge number of players out of contract. The football that we played under Roy, particularly in the last 12 to 18 months of his time with us, was the opposite of inspiring, let's just say that. And I think the size of the job was such that it just seemed like it would be too big for almost anyone.
It seemed like it would be beyond him, because obviously his managerial experience up to that point was fairly limited. It was fairly lowbrow.
Wasn't probably known for overhauling a squad, stamping an identity. So it was something new to him. But I think that's something that like kind of caught everyone off guard. Obviously, how quickly he could stamp his identity on that team.
Yeah,
and
I think. Go on.
For me personally, continue. Go for it.
Well, so I was just going to say, in relation, I don't want to do down Roy Hodgson here, and some people have been a bit critical of me amongst the Palace fan base because they feel like I take pot shots at him, but it's not really what I'm trying to say when I put this across. Roy Hodgson's time at the club had run its course in the sense of he came in, we needed to stabilise in hand. He did exactly that. For the first 18 months, things were great. He had a very good squad: Ruben Loftus-Cheek, and Wilf, and Michy Batshuayi, and Yohan Cabaye. There was good footballers there. But the last 12 to 18 months, it was very much as if he'd have been happy with 38 0-0 draws. Yeah. And, don't get me wrong, it would have kept us in the league, but there's sort of a balance to be had between being stoic and reliable and going to football and still enjoying the football that you're watching as a fan.
100%.
You don't want to throw complete caution to the wind, but you want to go there and be entertained a little bit.
Yeah, 100%.
And there was such a lack of that with Roy that we were desperate for some sort of hope and a blueprint for what could be done better. And there were plenty of people that were saying, be careful what you wish for, what are you expecting? Your Palace, you'll just get relegated. And, you're quite right. Vieira was favourite to be first sacked by pretty much every single bookmaker. So the fact that, he came in and was able to stamp his authority so quickly is impressive. But I think genuinely, for players like Wilfried Zaha, for Mark Gay, for Abir Eze, you have to remember, Roy Hodgson is, at that point, a 73-year-old man. He doesn't have the connection with those lads. Whereas they've all grown up watching Premier League football. They saw Vieira. They know what 100%. He did with France and with Arsenal. And that respect, as soon as he got in the door, enabled him to get across his tactical ideas, I think.
Yeah,
You know, it
can't play
gives
one
him-
touch, one bounce with Roy Hodgson, bless him.
Well, I mean, don't get me wrong, you could, but I just think
I've seen some clips that would suggest
that clip of him at Watford where he like does like a fucking lofted through ball.
it's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah,
I
it's
couldn't
crazy.
play that now.
Yeah. Well, when you talking about how you'd rather a bit more of inspiring football, I don't want to liken it too much to Arsenal, but obviously we went from Emery to Arteta, and everyone, like with Palace's situation where they're saying, oh, be careful what you wish for, because Emery did all right and then we got rid of him. But I think amongst the Arsenal fans, or most of them, they would say that the football was so uninspiring that we'd rather take the risk on a project, on a potential identity that we could get behind, rather than this kind of flat, uninspiring football that might get us top four, might get us an occasional trophy. We'd rather a bit more of an identity and something that we can believe in. I think that's obviously not totally the same for Palace, but not too dissimilar.
Yeah, I think often, I mean, it's not anyone's fault necessarily, but you do often get fan bases, by their very definition, they're not going to live and breathe what other clubs are doing. So an Everton fan isn't going to care about Newcastle and their style of play. They're just going to look at Newcastle and say, you deserve to be there in the pecking order. Similarly, other big clubs like your Manchester Uniteds and Liverpools aren't going to look at Arsenal and go, well, you deserve to be challenging for titles. You deserve to have, fantastic football. You're sitting there in the European places. What more do you want? And I think that is part and parcel of the lack of care that other people have for other people's football clubs. But if you're the one that's going every week and you live and breathe that club, then you know what you want. And if you own that and you can say, we tried something, it didn't work, but at least we had a go, and then don't blame those that have put their faith in a new project, then, you're always opening yourself up to the potential for something better. You look at Arsene Wenger, prime example, completely untested, ended up being the greatest manager potentially in the club's history. So
100%.
You have to take a punt sometimes.
Yeah, you do. 100%. And while we're talking about kind of the top lot, the big six, Palace last year, they absolutely had some big results against the top six. So we're talking about Arsenal. In particular. Drew against Arsenal 2-2 and then beat us 3-0.
Should have beat you at the Emirates.
Yeah, 100%. Scraped to last minute equaliser. Spurs, you beat 3-0. Who was that? Edouard hat-trick? Yeah,
no, he got two. He scored with his... Like, I always say scored with his first touch, and then you get little jobs with it that say he touched the ball just beforehand.
Yeah. And then didn't lose to City as well. That's massive.
Didn't concede to City.
Yeah, that's crazy. So
2-0, yeah.
Yeah, it's just...
So, talking about Palace and what we expect for the season, obviously, you've lost Conor Gallagher, which is a huge loss because he had an amazing season for you. Who do you see stepping into that role? Because I don't think Vieira will be changing systems, but who do you think can fill that position that he's going to leave?
Well, we've signed Czech Decore from Lens. I'm not sure if you know a great deal about him, but
I've seen in pre-season he's been playing some absolute beautiful passes.
Yeah, he is basically, and I'm a little bit reluctant to say this because it's an obvious thing to say, but he's basically like a Patrick Vieira regen. Someone that will run with the ball, look to advance play, but still sits in front of the back four, can tackle, can screen, can break the lines with passes. You don't want to get too carried away because pre-season is pre-season, but everyone I've spoken to who has watched a lot of French football over the last couple of years tell me that he is the absolute, cast iron guarantee of success. And I think it's a little bit of a strange one. We've spent 8 years-ish being told that we're a one-man team with Wilfried Zaha. All of a sudden, Conor Gallagher comes into the setup. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, because we've lost Conor, we're not going to be successful this season. So I'm always, reluctant to sort of put too many eggs in one particular player's basket. But I do think Iber Eze is someone who, towards the back end of Roy's last season, which would have been the 2020-21 campaign, he obviously picked up that injury. Yeah. He spent the lion's share of last season getting back up to full speed. And obviously, given the fact that he is our permanent player and Conor Gallagher was on loan, most Palace fans would far rather see Abire Eze flourish than Conor Gallagher be facilitated in the side. And I don't think if Conor Gallagher was playing alongside Abire Eze every week, it would have necessarily worked. Whereas if you've got a more defensive-minded player in Chet Decore sitting there at the base of the midfield, you can potentially play as an out-and-out 10 with Zaha and Elise Arabioli on either side of him. And I think that probably is a lot more balanced than what we actually had last season.
Yeah,
Well,
obviously, as a
QPR
QPR fan, I've seen a lot of Abireze. Hoping to see him on Saturday at the friendly. But yeah, just an absolutely phenomenal player. A player who really, you watch him get the ball and he just seems to have so much time on it. And that's not because of the opposition. That's because he just allows himself to generate space. And I'm really excited for him to get a full season because I believe he was in the extended England squad for that Euros before he picked up that injury.
Yeah, I think he got the call on. So it's a bit of a mad story that he did the training session where he picked up the injury. It happened. He got taken to the medical facility. They then took him to hospital. He got told that he was out for however long it was. Got home, opened his phone and had a text from England saying he'd been called up to the provisional squad. Which is just incredible, really.
It's gutting because as a QPR fan, I know exactly what he's capable of. But in a broader basis, you've got such a young, exciting squad. You've got players like Eze, Margay, you've got Elise as well, who came on leaps and bounds last season. Obviously, you've added Doucouré. You've added Sam Johnson as well, which is a phenomenal coup because he's been fantastic for West Brom. And I think every Premier League club was sniffing around him when his contract was coming up. And Malcolm Abbey as well.
He looked a menace in pre-season friendly.
Some phenomenal business by Palace this summer. And you must just be so excited and waiting for the season just to get going.
Yeah, we've actually, or it's about to be announced, Chris Richards is signing from Bayern Munich as well. And to be honest, I'm not one of those people that will pretend to be across every single player in world football because I think you can come unstuck very quickly if you try to present that image of yourself. But when the rumours first sort of picked up a few days back, started doing some pretty serious research into him, and the more I read about him, the more natural fit it feels for us because he's a big lad, but he's quick. He can play with both feet. He's primarily a centre-back, but he can play on the left and the right. Yeah. So I think it gives us the option to play potentially a back three with wing-backs. It gives us the option to have backup to Gay and Anderson. Obviously, he's going to want to get into the Qatar World Cup squad for the US. So another very clever signing from the club, I think. And I think he's signing a 5-year deal at 22. So, it's not as though we're only going to have him for a couple of years and then have to wave goodbye. But it is, you're quite right, just a very, very exciting time to be a Palace fan. I mean, you mentioned Michael Elise. Obviously, I love Ebbs to bits. Don't get me wrong. But Michael Elise is incredible. I've never seen a player at Palace at the age that he is be as good as he is. And obviously,
how old is he? 19?
He's young. Yeah, I've never seen anything like it, lads. Yeah. Honestly, he's one of those players that if he was at Man City now or at Man United, people would be talking about him as a potential future Ballon d'Or winner because he doesn't have a weak spot, really, other than maybe his strength at his age, but obviously that can be worked on. Yeah, his game is just flawless. And he has such poise on the ball. I've never seen him get flustered. If you look, you mentioned that Man City game a minute ago. Yeah. The 2-0 win. The second goal of that game is Michael Elise to a T and it sort of speaks to the different mentality that Patrick Vieira has brought about because we were 1-0 up with 5 minutes to go and he put Michael on, which is ridiculous, really. It's the sort of thing that Roy Hodgson wouldn't have done in a million years.
Yeah, never.
But he picked the ball up on the edge of our box. He ran with it. He dragged 2 men out of position, got towards the edge of the box, played it over to Wilf. Wilf played it back to him. And it's the most simple pass you could possibly make, but he's executed it with such poise. It's just a little cushion for Conor Gallagher, but it's right into Conor's path. It basically comes across the box to him and he just cushions it as if he's just there to set him up and he put the ball in the back of the net. Trust me, go and find it on YouTube and you'll see exactly what I mean. But this is a kid that had come on away at Man City 2 minutes before, and there's just no nerves to him. He's just like, I'm here to do this job, and I've got it in the bag. And
put
that's
my
why
mark on this game. Put my mark on this 5 minutes of the game. I like that.
And he'll just do it every single week.
Yeah.
He done it a lot for Reading in the Championship, and obviously that's what turned Palace onto him a lot. I think there was a lot of clubs who were very excited for him, and Palace done very well finalising that transfer.
Yeah, for cheap as well.
Before we sort of wrap up, Palace have had a bit of a weird pre-season though, because half the squad's gone away and half the squad's remained, I think, due to vaccinations and things like that. So they played it's about 6 games, but like 3 and 3.
Because I was looking at their Twitter, and did you have like 2 friendlies in a day? Because I saw you playing United, and then you had another friendly.
We played Man United the other morning because it's obviously in Australia. It was the MCG. And then we played Gillingham in the evening.
Yeah. I was getting well confused. I was like, how have you got 2 games on the same day? But yeah.
I saw, obviously, Luke Planche. He scored a hat-trick versus Ipswich. He obviously joined Derby last season on loan. And he got 3 goals and 8 for them, which is quite impressive for such a young lad in such a struggling side. Is he one to look out for?
I would hope so. I mean, obviously, I've only seen him in Palace colours in pre-season, so you can't really get a solid grip of whether or not he's Premier League ready. I think from the noises that are coming out of the football club, he's more likely to go on loan to the Championship again this season than Ebiowi is. I think Ebiowi is looked upon as someone that can come off the bench and make a genuine difference almost immediately for us on that right-hand side. But who knows? You know, if he continues to play well in pre-season and score goals, then Patrick Vieira might well decide that he is someone that can be of use to the 25-man squad. Yeah. In relation to the split squads with pre-season, I'm not 100% sure what the thinking behind it is, but I would imagine that as far as I'm aware, the tour was signed off and agreed pre-COVID. And obviously Patrick Vieira has come in since then. It's something that we were contractually obliged to do. And that's why the lion's share of the first team players have actually stayed back in England, and quite a youthful group have gone over to the other side of the world. But you could spin it in a positive sense in that Patrick Vieira is having a lot of time up close and personal with those youth players, because if you haven't got them, when you've got your Zahas and your Ezes, you're always going to err on the side of caution and play those players rather than throwing in people that you otherwise wouldn't. So really, it may well serve us well across the entire campaign, because a couple of kids that maybe wouldn't have got minutes otherwise might be brought into the first team squad because Vieira can trust them because he's seen what they can do at close quarters, or at least that's what I'm sort of telling myself right now.
It is interesting. Before we let you go, what are your expectations for this season?
What are you hoping?
Because obviously, like we said, fantastic transfer window.
Exciting cup run last year, as well as semi-finals of the FA Cup. Are you expecting a cup run or a decent league run? What are you hoping for?
I mean, obviously, you don't want to expect semis or finals of cups when you're a Palace fan. It would be lovely, and I think it's key to point out that prior to Patrick Vieira coming in, I think it was something like 6 straight cup competitions that we'd gone out in the first round. I think Roy Hodgson just did not care about cups. And I don't necessarily blame him, because he had a job to do to keep us in the league, and he did that. But once again, it speaks to the lack of romance and enjoyment that we had during that period. I think, obviously, the overall ambition is to try and push towards the European places this season. Not necessarily, Europa League, but maybe sneak into a Conference League position. I actually saw the other day, in the 9 years since we were promoted in 2013, we've finished between 10th and 15th every single year. So as much as we get put amongst the relegation candidates year after year, we've been pretty solid in terms of our overall league placing for the most part. But I can't see us finishing below about 14th. As much as obviously you don't want to count your chickens before they've hatched, I think the squad is that good and the tactical ideology has worked that well in the first year that you would hope there would just be a little bit more in the way of progression this season. But at the same time, I don't want to predict that we're going to finish in Europe, because you can't say for sure. So,
well, I think we're going to do a bit of a predictions for the Prem, but I've got Palace finishing 8th or 9th, in my opinion.
I think anything above sort of
half would be
10th
ninth,
would be
yeah.
a great finish for Palace, especially if they can contend with the likes of like West Ham, Leicester, maybe
New money, Newcastle,
yeah, maybe even Wolves if they can turn their sort of fortunes around and play a bit more exciting football. But obviously, the age of the squad allows you to sort of have those years where you're there and thereabouts without worrying too much, because even if you don't keep those players, you're going to sell them on for a decent amount of money, which, given Palace's recent transfers, will be well invested.
Yeah, I think that is really the business model. You know, as much as you don't want to sound defeatist about it, we need to be realistic. And players like Abir Eze and Michael Elise, they're not coming to Palace to stay here for their entire careers. They're coming to be given a decent platform to play in the Premier League, to play progressive football, and then, you know, move on to bigger clubs in the footballing food chain. But I mean, you take Michael Elise as a prime example. He cost us £8 million. And, you know, a year on, you're looking at if anyone's paying us less than 40 or 45, you feel like they've robbed us.
I mean, you look at Jack Grealish to City for 100 million.
Exactly.
He only really had one good season in the Premier League with Villa, and that skyrocketed his valuation.
Yeah, and he's English.
And there's no reason it can happen,
like you said,
happen with Eze or Elise. You know what I mean? Even Mark Gay as well, phenomenal defender. And it's very exciting times.
Yeah, I mean, take Chris Richards, the one we're about to sign, as a prime example. You know, he's a 22-year-old that's comfortable on either foot, can play across the back four, has pace, has all the attributes you'd really need to be a success in the Premier League. Even if he just plays regularly for a year or two, I think the overall fee, including add-ons, is something like £13 million. So, you know, if you're a 24, 25-year-old defender by the time 2 or 3 years have passed and you've played regularly in an upwardly mobile Premier League side, you're going to be commanding 30 or 40 million quid. It's just a guarantee. 100%. So it's a very sound business model. Obviously, it's going to be a bit heart-wrenching when we have to wave goodbye to your Michael Elise's and your Abir Eze's. But as you just mentioned, you would assume that the recruitment team will invest that money properly. And I think that's the difference now compared to a few years back, really.
Yeah, I'm still not over Eze leaving, so thanks for bringing that up. Do you know what, Dan? It's been absolutely fantastic having you on. Chat. And I really would love to have you back on at some point during the season. Yeah, hopefully when Palace are top of the league.
Well, you know, we might surprise a few. I don't know about a title. I don't know about a Leicester City-esque push, but yeah.
Got to shove 20 on before the season starts. So
we got Arsenal first day, haven't we?
We do.
Yeah, hopefully Ross will be in tears.
Well, to be honest, I actually feel like Arsenal are going to be a very tough nut to crack this season, but we might catch you a bit cold. Who knows?
All right, one thing before you go: who you got winning the league, and who you got as bottom place?
I think you can't really look beyond City. You know, they won it last year. Added Haaland.
Yeah, Haaland to joke.
I mean, to sort of examine our 2 games against them last season, obviously the 2-0 win was a great result. They will always caveat it with the fact they got a man sent off towards the back end of the first half. We were already 1-0 up at that point, so I sort of take that with a pinch of salt, but I can understand where they're coming from. The 0-0 draw at Selhurst, they were very, very wasteful. You know, as much as we defended with our lives, I think they should have really scored 3 or 4. Yeah. And if you throw someone like Erling Haaland into that setup, given how prolific he is, I just can't see anyone living with City, really. I mean, Julian Alvarez played last night and
he looked
an
good.
Absolute revelation for him as well. So, I mean, look at Zinchenko. He's left Man City. He's a fantastic footballer. And yet he couldn't get regular minutes in their side. And that's the levels that you're talking about.
Yeah,
so
that would be my only worries about City is their outgoings, big names like Zinchenko, Sterling, Jesus. But like you said, their squad is so stacked that maybe they can lose those players and still walk the league pretty easily.
I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, obviously, Liverpool are there or thereabouts.
Yeah.
But I think, I actually said it on my podcast this morning, funny enough. I don't, and this isn't me trying to be a Liverpool fanboy here by any means, but I don't think that the job that Jurgen Klopp has done over the last few years and how close they've been to Manchester City gets the respect that it should. Because to all intents and purposes, you look at the money that's been spent, you look at the quality of the players Man City have got, they should be a runaway train.
Yeah.
And the fact that they've kept on to their coattails throughout is genuinely admirable for me. And, you know, it hasn't been the case that Chelsea have been able to do that or Manchester United or Arsenal. So I think this year might be the one where we see City win it by 10 or 11 points. Not because Liverpool are rubbish, but just because, you know, it's so very, very difficult to keep up with.
I think they're also going through a period of transition, Liverpool. Obviously, they've lost Mane and they're sort of transitioning to this formation where they're going to play with an out-and-out striker, which they haven't really had for a while. So perhaps this is City's title before the season even started. But as we know, the Premier League cannot be predicted. So, before you go, who you got finishing bottom?
I would probably have to say, I mean, obviously, I don't want to get fans of that particular club on my neck, but there's only about 12 of them anyway. So, Bournemouth, because
that's who we've got. Yeah.
With all due respect to them, you know, you look at the size of their club, without Eddie Howe, I know Scott Parker is Scott Parker and he's had a crack at it before, but the strength of the division now is so big that if you're going to come in, like you see the way Nottingham Forest have gone about their business this summer, it's impressive in itself. And I genuinely feel like Steve Cooper is one of the best coaches working in the game today. Fulham, similarly, you know, you could argue they might finish bottom, but you would hope that this time they might work it out and Mitrovic might be able to turn his 170 goals a season in the Championship into 10 or 15 in the Prem. I mean, you could make cases for the likes of Brentford or, I don't know, like, I think Bournemouth are just the easy option, really.
Yeah,
you know,
we discussed this last week.
Out of the just promoted teams has been the least inspiring. So that's
their transfer activity has been pretty much stagnant.
Yeah,
they haven't really made any additions or anything that's going to really catch your eye. So
if you want to be completely left field, and this is just coming to me off the top of my head, is Everton. Because,
they look bad, don't they?
I mean, I know it's a friendly and they've lost to Minnesota 4-0 last night, but they've lost Richarlison.
Yeah, and
if you talk to any Everton fan, without him, they were gone. It's as simple as that. And I don't think they can invest a great deal of that because of financial fair play. So I don't, this isn't me, you know, coming across as some sort of anti-Lampard hater, but I'm just not sure it's going to work. If you see what I mean.
I mean, they finished the season playing Alex Iwobi right wing back, so I think that says all it needs to say.
And obviously, from my own personal perspective, I hope it's Brighton, but I don't think there's a chance of that.
I think Graham Potter's is
good manager. Yeah,
you do well. Anyway, Dan, it's been absolutely amazing having you on.
No worries.
Thank you so much. Do you want to plug your socials on your Patreon before you leave?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on HLTCO on Twitter, and if you want to look at the Patreon, I record a daily Palace podcast Monday to Friday and a daily general football one Monday to Friday as well. £2.50 for each of them or £4 for both. I like to think it's relatively good value for money, sort of a roundup of the game in 20 minutes each morning so you can go about your day. And other than that, follow me on Twitter or don't. If you don't like me, it's up to you.
He's really popular with Stan Collymore, so that says all it needs to say.
Been blocked for 12 years.
Oh, fantastic.
We'll get there one day.
Thank you so much, Stan.
It's been
we
an
really
absolute
appreciate
pleasure,
it.
mate.
No worries.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, mate.
Speak soon. Cheers, mate.